Now in this case we see it's the theoretical image of the beast of the Epoch-ellipse, of the dragon, which on the days of judgment spews out fire and brimstone on macrocosmic creation. Thanks to the symbolic value of the letter S displaced on purpose, we understand that the inscription must be translated in secret language, that is, in the language of the gods or the language of the birds, and that the meaning must be found with the help of the rules of diplomacy. What is the language of the birds?
English.
English? Not exactly. What is the language of the birds?
Music.
What are the rules of diplomacy? What do diplomats do? Well, what do birds do? The language of the birds. See, the language of the birds is the same as the language of the gods. The birds, basically what characterizes birds more than anything is flight, the ability to fly. And you know, whenever you see ancient depictions, whether they're Sumerian or Egyptian or whatever, of the gods, how are they always depicted? How do you tell the gods if you're looking at an inscription? They're the ones with the wings. They're the ones with the wings. The rules of diplomacy, meaning the diplomats are the ones that go from basically one nation to another nation. They're the ones that are the go-betweens between different orders of civilization. All right? The language of the birds is basically the language of symbolism, the all-pervasive language of symbolism that's hidden all around us. It's in the words we speak, it's in the images of our day-to-day life, we just don't know how to recognize it. The alchemists and the initiates, part of their initiation was that they were given this key to decipher or read the language of the birds. And the way they decipher it is according to the rules of diplomacy. Now, this is not easy stuff to find. You can go on the internet and hunt and hunt and hunt for anything specific about this, you won't find it. There's quite a few things written about the language of the birds and the language of the gods, but nothing specific.
Didn't Ken Keyes or somebody write a book on that? The bird tribe?
I don't think he was talking about the same thing. In any case, it gives you a way of extracting meanings. Now, I gave you a good example 2 weeks ago from the language of the birds, the word Epoch-ellipse. If you remember what I said, remember the word apocalypse? And I suggested a correlation, a correlative meaning with the word apocalypse, which in the Greek was apokalypsis. 2 English words. We can trace these 2 English words back and find that their roots are in the same soil as the Greek term apokalypsis. What were the 2 English words? See, this is why we have to go over things. This is why we need redundancy, Paul.
I don't remember that at all.
Jerry, I guess I'm going to have to give you the attaboy for tonight.
One of them, was it ellipse?
An epoch. What are the 2 things that we need to know to predict any orbit? We need 2 pieces of information. The timing, which in astronomical lingo is the epoch, and we need the shape, the geometry, which is the ellipse, right? We need the epoch of the ellipse. We need the epoch of the ellipse. Now that is an example of the language of the birds, right there.
It's in English too.
Well, the language of the birds, English has its roots within the sacred language. You know, as does Greek, as does ancient Hebrew, as does Sanskrit. So it follows that our English language is going to have these connections in there because it has its roots in the same soil going back. I mean, most of our words in English come ultimately from Latin or Greek. Well, let's go on here with what Fulcanelli has to say. What he does is he takes this phrase, O crux ave spes unica, and he essentially rearranges it. What is that called when you rearrange letters to get a new word?
Anagram.
What's that called?
Anagram.
Anagram, yes. He takes it as an anagram, and he rearranges the words, rearranges the letters, and then essentially gets the phonetic equivalent of this saying in French, which I can't pronounce properly, but it'd be something like il écrit que la vie se réfugie en un seul espace. Something like that. I'm sure I'm butchering it horribly. But what he did, and he took the letters of O Crux Ave Spes Unicum, he rearranged them in the form of an anagram, then took the literal pronunciation of that in French, and came up with this saying, which he is maintaining was actually an encoded saying that somebody put in there on purpose. And it translates as you can read there, it is written that life takes refuge in a single space. And we learned that a country exists where death cannot reach man at the terrible time of the double cataclysm. As for the geographical location of this promised land, from which the elite will take part in the return of the Golden Age, it is up to us to find it. Now, Fulcanelli in his writings has left us a trail of breadcrumbs in the form of veiled references, obscure symbolical connections, and so forth. He points us to the Hande Cross. The Hande Cross is a statement in stone, and we'll come to that. For the elite, the children of Elias will be saved according to the word of Scripture, because their profound faith, their untiring perseverance and effort will have earned for them the right to be promoted to the rank of disciples of the Christ light. They will bear his sign and will receive from him the mission of renewing for regenerated humanity the chain of tradition of the humanity which has disappeared. Now, this is what he's saying back in the 1950s, as this appended afterward to the book he wrote in the 1920s, which he essentially gave to the world before he disappeared. Does he know what he's talking about? Is this a real possibility that the alchemists have some kind of information that would lead them to believe that there is an event coming at some point?
Well, they say right now, what is the next closest body that we know of is in 2029.
I think that is the closest one.
I believe it is. But yet one crossed the meridian of the Earth the other day, was already past us before they knew it was there.
I was actually going to show you some updated stuff on that 2 weeks ago, but Paul wouldn't let me, so. This is the excerpt from the afterword by Paul Meverill, Epilogue in Stone, in the Fulcanelli. Paul Meverill, the guy who wrote The Great Cross of Hande. There was two guys. One of them's from Weeder, Jay Wider, and who's the other guy?
Had him up there on
Yeah, the guys who wrote this right here. There was a book written that came out in the late 90s by two guys who went over and researched the Hande stone. And they tried to find this guy, Paul Meverill, and they couldn't find him. They couldn't find the guy, this Paul Meverill. They came to the conclusion that Paul Meverill wasn't a real person, that it was a pseudonym for somebody. As it says, this book is ultimately about Fulcanelli, and it is perhaps fitting to conclude where he completed his great statement in Les Mystères des Cathedrals at Hande. In so doing, we shall not presume to expand his alchemical commentary, but rather to lift a corner of the veil obscuring a vehicle of that teaching. The cyclic cross at Hande is a statement in stone about the stone. Now, what is the stone when he's got capitalized? That's the alchemical stone, right? And what is the alchemical stone? Yes, the philosopher's stone. That's the objective of the whole alchemical operation, is to achieve the philosopher's stone. Once you've achieved the philosopher's stone, what does that then imply? Well, you now have the means for transcendence, for renewal, for regeneration. It's the ultimate universal medicine of regeneration, the philosopher's stone, right? But he says, the cyclic cross at Hande is a statement in stone about the stone and a record of the fact of success in the great work by an unknown man. Simultaneously, it is an observation upon the nature and timing of tremendous world events involving yet another kind of stone. Now notice the date of this, 1980. I had been fascinated by Fulcanelli since about the mid-70s. and had read Mystery of the Cathedrals several times, had looked. There was no internet, of course, then. I couldn't find anything else other than that one book. In 1980, this book came out by this European scholar, I think he's from England, K.R. Johnson, Fulcanelli, and it had this particular afterword. Well, in 1980, if you recall, was a pivotal year in the study of Earth history, because it was in 1980 that the three independent teams all came to the conclusion that a great asteroid or comet had collided with the Earth and caused the catastrophe that wiped out the dinosaurs. And so this came out the same year, where you have this man basically pointing, but from an occult perspective, pointing to the same conclusion that these scientists were coming to, that a stone about the stone, a stone about the stone. Well, the scientists had come up with a version of the stone also, the stone that hit where the Yucatan Peninsula is and essentially wiped out the dinosaurs, right? So I was familiar with that. I was familiar with that because I had read that independently of Fulcanelli. And at that time, I was still puzzling over what Fulcanelli actually meant. But when I got a hold of this, I mean, it was tremendously exciting to me because I had been pondering what I had just been learning by studying the scientific evidence. For example, the evidence for the dusting of Earth by Iridium and the cosmic layer of Iridium. Well, I'll try to put this information first for our next meeting, the stuff that's come out about the effects of Iridium on DNA, human DNA. But I think that there's a very important alchemical link there in terms of what it does to the conductivity of the DNA molecule. Anyways, Iridium is deposited on Earth by catastrophic impacts from space. And I strongly now suspect that Iridium is one of the fundamental ingredients which one begins the alchemical operation with.
And it's not natural to Earth. You can't go out and dig.
You can't go out and dig to it. It is natural to the Earth. I mean, as natural as anything else, but it's an iron lover. It's a siderophile, which means it bonds readily to iron. So in the early days of the Earth, any iridium that would have been near the surface would have bonded with iron that was in the process of sinking to the core, leaving the surface of the Earth or the crust of the Earth impoverished with iridium. So when you find a layer of iridium sandwiched between two layers of rock, as did the scientists back in 1979 and 80, they realized that that was there because it had been deposited by this impact. The impact had thrown a veil of iridium around the planet, which then precipitated out and formed this layer that was found at every place on Earth where the Cretaceous-Tertiary transition was preserved in the rocks. So this 1980 was an interesting year in terms of the information about the unknown past of our Earth that essentially was made available exoterically to researchers, both from the scientific venue as well as the occult venue. Fulcanelli goes on to say, the age of iron has no other seal than that of death. Its hieroglyph is the skeleton bearing the attributes of Saturn, the empty hourglass, symbol of time run out, and the scythe, reproduced in the figure 7, which is the number of transformation, of destruction, and annihilation. And in Masonry...
Well, let me throw something in there.
Yeah.
Iridium is 77 on the periodic table.
Very good, Brad. Yeah. Now in Masonic symbolism we find the winged hourglass showing time having run out, and you notice the scythe. Upside down. And of course if you turn it over, what number do you get? 7, yeah. Okay.
The other thing is that 2029 asteroid name, Apophis, I think, actually means death.
Mm-hmm. So this is a Masonic symbol here, found on some of the old Masonic manuscripts and carpets, showing the winged hourglass. And the hourglass is the symbol of time run out, essentially. And here we have the skull and crossbones surmounted by the cross. Notice the crossbone, the crossbone. Now, what is the origin of the skull and crossbone symbols? Templars. Yeah, they're the first ones in history that we know employed that. And here it's found on this, this is actually a little cemetery at, you ever heard of a place called Rennes-le-Château?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. This is at the entrance to the cemetery. You have this Templar signature there, the skull and the crossed bones. Now, the crucifixion took place on Golgotha, and what was Golgotha? The place of the skull, yeah. So there's all kinds of interweaving and interconnected symbolism here that is necessary for one to actually try to sort this out. Well, here is a Masonic jewel from the early 1700s. Now, rich repository of symbolism. First of all, notice it's a big 8-pointed star, isn't it?
Yeah.
And what do we got going on in there? We have a cross, don't we? And what's wrapped around the cross? A snake.
Caduceus.
Mm-hmm. And at the base of the cross, we've got a couple of things. What do we got?
A dagger.
A dagger. Also what?
Skull and cross.
Skull and crossbones. Okay, what I've been getting at, oh, and what is this? Anybody can tell what that is?
The earth.
It's a coffin.
Oh,
It's a coffin, right. Okay, so we have a coffin, we have a sword with a wavy blade, we have the skull and crossbones, we have the cross, we have the skull and crossbones, we have the cross, we have the serpent wrapped around the cross, and notice the position of the serpent's body.
ellipse.
So when you put all that together, what does it mean? You put all that together, what does it mean? Well, see, if you knew the language of the birds, you could read that. And that's what I mean. The language of the birds is the language of symbolism. But you have to, when you read something like this, you have to go in essentially with the whole context of meaning associated with the cross. You have to go in with a context of meaning associated with that wavy sword. Okay, I'll give you an example. The wavy sword, in the Masonic Lodge, the tiler who sits at the door of the Masonic Lodge, who doesn't let anybody in, right? He holds a wavy sword, right? What does that wavy sword refer to? Well, I can tell you one thing that it refers to. In the Masonic tradition, the wavy sword refers to the sword wielded by the two cherubim who guarded the entrance to the Garden of Eden. Now, the tiler who sits at the door of the Masonic Lodge holds the wavy sword. However, look at the wavy sword again. We found that the sword was also one of the symbols associated with what? I should give you guys that list. I should give you guys that list. I have a list here. I'll pull it up. What is the coffin? So you've got coffin, you've got skull and crossbones, you've got the serpent, you've got the cross, you've got the wavy sword, all of those enclosed within an 8-pointed star. You see, this is actually a sentence that's been constructed by somebody, just like we make a sentence, you know, by putting words together. Because of the arrangement of those words, it gives us a specific meaning. If I took and rearranged those words, if I scrambled them, it would convey no meaning. You would then have to sit down and unscramble it to find the meaning. Well, that's kind of how occultism works. We have to go in and unscramble the symbols, in effect. But in order to do that, you have to be knowledgeable about the symbolic language. You have to know the multi-layered, multi-dimensional meaning of these occult symbols. Yeah.
What does cross means in this?
Well, in most occult traditions, anybody know what does the cross refer to? If you look at the in the tarot or in alchemy, the cross is always given a specific association. What is it? Well, the cross is vertical. Like when we see the depiction of the cross on Golgotha, it's vertical. Now, in Masonry, there's the raising of the dead level to the living perpendicular, which corresponds with the raising of the cross, right? In most traditions, you'll see like the symbol of Earth. Think in astrology. What's the symbol of the Earth? It's a circle with the cross in it. Isn't that the symbol from astrology for the Earth? Right? A cross, right? The cross typically and universally represents the realm of matter. It represents the Earth, the world of substance, the material world, the stuff that we can take in our hands. Okay, now that's not to say that it doesn't have a higher meaning as well. But typically you find it associated both in the New World and Old World symbolism. You'll find the same idea of representing the world, the Earth, the material world, the world of substance, the circle within the cross within the circle. Okay, what we see when you think about modern Christianity, and I just cite that because we all live in a, quote unquote Christian culture. So this Christian symbolism is prevalent around us. Now, it's my belief that Orthodox Christians don't understand the symbolism that they're actually practicing. You have to be knowledgeable about metaphysics and occultism and ancient symbolism and so forth, I think, to really understand, because the Christians inherited a body of symbolism, including the symbolism of the cross. Now, when you're driving down the road and you see the little country church, you've got the tall pointed steeple, and there's the cross, right? Lifted up from the earth, right? Lifted up from the earth. I think that is one of the key meanings there, is that it's taking the material world and it's lifting it up towards the heavens. I was just going to deviate quickly here to show you, you've seen this, but just to remind you, so that you can see here are typically the traditional associations and representations of comets, meteors, and fireballs. Go through that list.
Swastika.
Swastika, yes. Have you heard this one before? Look at here. Go back to right here. Here's from ancient China. Look right there. You see the 7 types of comets? There it is. There's your swastika right there. Also, if you look on this Neolithic iron sword,
Yes.
actually made out of meteorite iron.
Wow.
What's it got on it? 2 versions of the swastika. Now, once you realize that a comet nucleus, when it's outgassing, it can spin. And as it's spinning, it can be throwing off jets of gas that would actually give it the appearance. Carl Sagan, in his book on comets, did a nice graphic, because he realized that as he was studying pictures taken of spinning comet nuclei and seeing the jets of gas coming off, he saw and made the association with the swastika, and then began looking in all of these ancient documents and discovered representations of swastikas, sometimes specifically associated, like with the ancient Chinese, with comets and a type of comet. Yes, Don?
Wasn't the cross also a symbol for the intersection of 2 paths or orbits?
The intersection of 2 paths or orbits is very good, Don. That's very good. And even like the idea of the X, think of the X as the intersection of 2. X marks the spot.
Yeah.
Orbit of the Earth, orbit of a celestial object. And there's your X. There's one of the meanings of the X. There's another meaning of the X too, because I think one of the associations of X marks the spot of what? The location of what? Well, what he was talking about there was the refugium, the sanctuary in which humans, the elite, the initiates, find, in which allows them to survive the transition of the world ages and then essentially regenerate, repopulate, replenish the new world. So let's go back to this list. Let this list, look at this. The dragon, the serpent, swords, spears, and arrows, long-haired, bearded. We learned that the very word kometa in Greek meant long-haired. Beams, sometimes they're referred to as beam stars. I remember when I was a kid, my grandfather used to tell me a story about when he was a boy in Sweden and he was out walking in the woods at night near a lake. And he said, of course, he didn't know what it was. And when he told me the story, he didn't know what it was. And I realized later, after I grew up and was doing reading, that what he'd seen, you know, was a meteor. But he said it looked like a great burning beam fell into the lake. You know, and I always thought a big beam, and I kept picturing what was a beam fall, you know, a big incandescent red hot beam. He said a red hot beam fell out of the sky and fell into the lake. So with beams and burning torch, where have we seen burning torches?
Like a sunbeam or like an iron
Like
eye beam?
like an iron eye beam. Like, yeah, like a beam. A burning torch, a burning lamp, a thunderbolt. What's a thunderbolt? Zeus hurls the thunderbolts. A swastika, a broom. They were called, the Chinese called them broom stars because they believed that like a broom, it would come in and sweep away the old world. And then stones, or a stone or stones from the sky, and then finally a chariot. And I don't necessarily say that I've exhausted all of the meanings. But if you take those as a whole, and then you start reading into the mythology and the legends and the occult traditions, and it talks about a chariot, you go, If it talks about a long-haired woman, you go, If it talks about somebody wielding a sword, a burning torch.
Start bringing it to a close.
No, I'm just getting wound up here now.
No, the spot and the date.
As Fulcanelli said, it's up to us to find it. No, I haven't found it. I'm honing in on a couple of places. Yeah, like Gurdjieff said, it's not the bones you got to find, it's the dog. Take a look at this now. Okay. What do we see here? What do we see? St. George, what's he doing? He's slaying the dragon, and he's protecting the maiden, right? Now, Gustave Moreau, you see the maiden? Look, don't you see her sitting on the rock? There she is.
Those hidden things.
Yeah, you got to look. Let's see here. I think I've got another. Here we go. Another version of St. Joseph. St. George, I mean. Once again, you notice the same elements. You see the dragon thrusted. Yeah. Now, see, to me, this is all representative of what basically. Who is the maiden? Sure, that's what I see. I see that the maiden is Earth. And if the maiden becomes Earth, then the whole rest of the symbolism begins to fall into place. John Martin, another initiate artist, occultist, who concealed hidden meanings in his works of art. The eve of the deluge. What is he telling us? What is John Martin telling us here? He's telling us, yeah, what is this up here? And see, he's giving us timing here. You'll notice sun setting here, a new moon. That's an important clue.
And the birds.
And the birds, yeah, and the birds. Whit, you're getting good, Whit. And we find the Lenape stone. And what do we find right here? Lightning bolts.
Yeah.
See, the
thunderbolts.
The thunderbolts, right, the thunderbolts. Exactly. We find elliptical depressions on the ground. We find forests with trees broken over. Well, yeah, there's a mammoth.
Well, that would be you could say that would be a pictorial representation of a catastrophe.
That's exactly what I see there. Eon, the Mithraic god of cosmic time. Now, notice the serpent. First of all, notice the depiction of the earth, the material world, the circle with the cross. See it? He's got his feet in here. Notice the serpent coiled, a helicoidal path going around, and here's the serpent's head right up here. Notice that Mithras is depicted, as I said, the gods are always depicted with the wings, okay? Notice that he holds in his hand a key. He holds a key. And then he's got a lion's head. Now, based upon what we've learned here, what do you associate now with the lion?
Constellation of Leo.
Leo. And what do we associate with the constellation of Leo? The right? One of the great meteor streams of history, the Leonids. Remember, earlier tonight I was talking about the dream of Sargon? Sargon's dream, according to the Arabic legends of the building of the pyramid, Sargon's dream was that he saw fire pouring out of the constellation of Leo. Now here's God of cosmic time. He holds in his hand the staff of power, and he's holding it at an angle, right? What is that angle?
23 and a...
The tilt of the plane of the ecliptic, the Earth's axis.
How do they know that back there?
Well, that's the question, Whit. How did they know it?
How did we forget it? It's more like
Right. And so now when you go and you read the book of Revelations, and it says, there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his head, and his tail drew the 3rd part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to earth. I think we should take this literally. And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels, and prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent, called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast with him. Well, the one thing I did not list on that list was the comet as an image of Satan or the devil. But once you begin to look at the characteristics of the devil, it begins to make sense. Ancient rock art, which clearly appears to be depicting a cosmic bombardment.
It's like everybody's trying to warn us.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, so where we're going to get to with now is to explore a lot deeper into the occult traditions to see if we can discern what Paul is actually wanting to know and what Walt is wanting to know, and which I myself am wanting to know, which is several things here. I think we are being given essentially several possible paths, several roads that we can embark upon from this point. One, basically, the preferred plan is this, is that we as the human race get our shit together and we learn how to deal with it. If we get our shit together, I think essentially what Fulcanelli is warning us about, the terrible time of the double cataclysm, that can be averted. That's the preferred plan. The backup plan, and that has always been the preferred plan. When the preferred plan doesn't happen, you've got to have a backup plan. We're here now in 2006 because some ancestors thousands of years ago had a backup plan. The backup plan is, even though if civilization doesn't make it, the human race has to make it. And when we go back and we look at the dawning of recorded history, we see essentially two elements at work. We see a lot of primitive people living very primitive hand-to-mouth existence as subsistence farmers or hunter-gatherers, but then in there we see the workings, the unmistakable workings of some group with superior knowledge. This is evident, I think, to everybody in this room. Okay, who were these people? Well, to me, it's clear that essentially to get to the identity of who this group was, we essentially have to go back to the antediluvian world and realize that as the former world age was coming to an end, you had essentially the human race divided into 3 categories. You had the survivors, and then you had those that didn't survive. The survivors were in the minority. Of the survivors, there were two classifications. One were those who survived because they were lucky, they were in the right place at the right time. But the other group of survivors were the group that survived because that was their plan.
The elite.
What Fulcanelli is referring to as the elite. That was their intention, to survive. And by whatever mechanism, whatever means they had available to them, they had a sense of what was coming. They knew about the cycle. They knew where they were in the cycle, and they prepared themselves. And they survived, and they carried the seeds of their civilization, of their science, of their wisdom across from the former world to the new world that we're in now. And it was those seeds that, when planted, yielded the great civilizations of old, the Egyptians, the Sumerians, the Indus civilization, and so forth. Which brings us down to now, which essentially, of all the signs, point to the same thing, that we've essentially come to the 11th hour within the cosmic clock. The great year is rapidly drawing to one of the event nodes where things would happen normally. It also seems to point to the mechanism that's driving these changes. It's extraterrestrial in nature. And now here we are, a global civilization, and we have access to all of these disparate streams of knowledge for the first time in 10 or 12,000 years. And for the first time, the human race is able to take these disparate streams and bring them back. You'll see on all the tarot cards, you see from the very beginning, there's this stream of water that goes out and it disperses. And it's depicted in all the tarot cards flowing. Well, the idea is at the conclusion of the cycle, all of these streams